Hello! I wanted to introduce myself before we got started. I'm Jamie Margolotti, and I've been a librarian at the University of Delaware for 14 years. I work in special collections, where I'm the coordinator of description for our manuscript materials. I know you can't visit us in person now, but we'd love to see you when we're open again. We have interesting exhibitions, many of which are online, along with digital versions of some of our collections. I've been doing culinary classes and history classes for several years, and I have a personal interest in the topic. My own cookbook collection isn't nearly as extensive as the one at UD, but in addition to modern favorites like Alton Brown, Mark Bittman, and America's Test Kitchen, I'm always on the lookout for interesting books and ephemera at flea markets and estate sales. One recent New Year's Eve, my boyfriend and I even celebrated by baking a gingerbread dumpster fire. The items I'm going to highlight today are part of special collections. In many, but not all cases, I can help you find the online versions of these books. But why would UD have such a big collection of this stuff? Largely because food history is, as I'm sure you know by now, interdisciplinary. It crosses over with the history of early printed books and book arts, history of science, especially chemistry, horticulture, material culture studies, and the history of Delaware. This is an image of our copy of De Re Coquinaria, attributed to Apicius, the first known collection of recipes. Possibly assembled in the 1st century AD, the first printed edition appeared in 1483, and this one dates from 1541. The recipes are only the kinds of things that the privileged and most wealthy would eat, a trend which defines cookbooks for most of their early history. The Art of Cookery by Hannah Glassie was first published in England in 1747. During the colonial period and for decades into independence, if Americans were to consult the cookbooks, they would only have access to the ones published abroad. Glassie's book was popular into the 19th century and was also published domestically. You're probably expecting to see recipes for food, but Glassie and many of the books we'll see in this progression also include cures for illnesses and formulas for things like cleaning solutions and, at least in this book, cosmetics. Additionally, there is an assumption on Glassie's part that the reader will not be doing this work herself, but will be instructing her servants. When you consider who is actually literate and who has access to books, this assumption makes perfect sense. Amelia Simmons produced the first cookbook written by an American and specifically for an American audience in 1796. Reading the prefaces to these books will really help you put them in context and see what the author's agenda and mindset are. Simmons intends that her book could be useful to a lady of fashion and fortune who wants to expand her knowledge, but as an orphan herself, she is especially concerned with helping a lady who is compelled by circumstances to go into domestic service. Simmons records adaptations of known recipes so they can be made with the raw materials available in America. On this page, there are recipes for Johnny cake and Indian slapjack, both of which include Indian meal, more commonly known as cornmeal. Mary Randolph's The Virginia Housewife, first published in 1824, is the first Southern cookbook. In addition to the kinds of alterations Simmons incorporated, you can also see the influence of cultures other than England, like France, Spain, and the East and West Indies had in the region. On this page alone are East Indian curry, West Indian gumbo, and okra. Randolph's background influenced her writing of this book. Well educated and raised in an elite political family, financial problems eventually compelled her to open a boarding house. In this book, she is passing on what she learned about how to manage such a household and use servants effectively. Eliza Leslie became one of the most prolific cookbook authors of the 19th century. Her Directions for Cookery, being a system of the art in its various branches, was first published in 1828, and she specifically looked to correct what she felt were the challenges of using English and French books, such as ingredients and tools that were not available domestically, and a general lack of sufficient explanation. In addition to intending for every recipe to contain all steps necessary for completion, she includes overall observations and advice at the start of each section. This section on baking offers extensive counsel on the best equipment to use in a particular situation. Sarah Josepha Hale, author of 1857's Mrs. Hale's Receipts for the Millions, was an advocate for the self-improvement of women. She acted as editor of The Ladies Magazine and the very popular Godey's Ladies Book, also writing both fiction and nonfiction. She was particularly interested in physical fitness and wellness. In her food writing, she advocates for the limitation of sweets, such as cakes, and encourages the consumption of fruit. This particular work is an extensive catalog of all manner of areas where a woman might wish advice in running a household, far beyond simply cooking. Hale's many accomplishments also include a nearly 20-year campaign to have Thanksgiving made a national holiday and the writing of Mary Had a Little Lamb. Although it wasn't published in America, Mrs. Beeton's book of household management was another big seller. It was a massive work containing all aspects of running a household, and it was hugely popular, particularly because in addition to its hundreds of pages of recipes, it had many beautiful colored engravings. Leaping forward about 10 years from then, Marion Harland's Common Sense in the Household is released. Harland was a best-selling fiction author before moving on to nonfiction. Incorporating a wide range of recipes and presenting them with a conversational and encouraging tone, the book was a considerable success and even translated into French, German, and Arabic. You can get a clear sense of this tone in the section titled To Boil a Lobster. So, after you submerge the lobster, Harland consoles the reader. He will be restive under this vigorous hydropathic treatment, but allay your tortured sympathies by the reflection that he is a cold-blooded animal, destitute of imagination, and that pain, according to some philosophers, exists only in the imagination. However this may be, as his suffering will be short-lived. In 1896, Fanny Merritt Farmer brought significant changes to the structure of the cookbook. A student and later principal of the Boston Cooking School, she focused on the science of cooking and hoped that her book would lead to deeper thought and broader study of what to eat. A bestseller in its day and still available in both reprint and updated format, Farmer prized simplicity and clear organization. The listing format she pioneered is still in use today. She also helped to standardize the measurement of ingredients, including the concept of level measurement. As you can see in this picture, if you aren't using level measurement, you might be kind of confused as to how much you actually need to put in a recipe. This was a major move forward in food history. Our historical progression through cookery ends with Irma S. Rombauer, whose joy of cooking is just that, joyful. She maintains the precision of Farmer, but overlays it with friendly conversation. Her stated aim was creating palatable dishes with simple means for the average household. Her book was self-published in 1931 and then commercially published in 1936. This economical approach was also a factor in her success. Rombauer's friendly approach is evident in this section on mulled cucumbers. She states, "The cucumber is banned from many tables as indigestible or even poisonous. Digestion, alas, is an individual matter. Since it is said that good judgment is the result of experience, and that experience is the result of bad judgment, why not give the cucumber the benefit of the doubt at least once, to see whether it has really been maligned?" This next group of cookbooks are from the manuscript holdings of special collections. They were created by individuals for their own personal use. Although this one is English in origin, not American, I felt it was too lovely not to share. Mary Baker's recipe book is from 1730. The vellum binding, colorful watercolor illustrations, and calligraphic style print in multiple hands allow for the possibility that the volume was a gift presented to Mary Baker rather than a book actively kept by her. The 300 recipes include cookery entries on meat, fowl, vegetables, desserts, and beverages, as well as cures for medical ailments like smallpox and various salves. This index shows the efforts that were made to make it follow the style and organization that would be found in a printed book. The inclusion of recipes for both food and illnesses, both major and minor, is common in all of these collections, as is general housekeeping advice. With limited access to formal medicine, individuals took a personal and proactive role in maintaining their own health, sharing advice, and often cooking up their own remedies instead of purchasing them. With most of these works, we don't have information on the individuals who maintain them, other than what we can assume from how they constructed their recipe collections. This early to mid 19th century manuscript book belonged to Sarah K. Fodderall. The sorts of ingredients used, like oysters, tomatoes, and peaches, suggest that she might have lived in the mid-Atlantic, and the presence of imported foods like lemons, oranges, coconut, and pineapples could indicate a port city like Philadelphia. The food and medicinal recipes are kept separate, and one must flip the book to view the other. Another book of 19th century recipes, medicinal cures, and household hints, this collection is a mix of clippings from a variety of newspapers or magazines and handwritten entries with no apparent order. It is also notable because of its physical form. While the Mary Baker book appears to have been pristinely maintained, these other books show signs of regular use. They are often stained, with loose pages and broken bindings. It is easy to imagine this light, narrow pad fitting into an apron pocket for easy access in a kitchen. This late 19th century manuscript recipe book belonged to a German American and had entries in both languages. Particularly strong on desserts, it also has some clippings and additional recipes laid in. The book hints at a larger network of German Americans engaging with each other in ways that might have included trading recipes. It's this kind of communal view of cookery that we'll explore in the next section. Many of you have probably seen what we might call a charity cookbook at some point. Perhaps you even have one that a relative has had a recipe published in. This form of cookbook, which collects recipes from a community of interest and generally sells them as a way of raising funds to support the organization or a related project, dates back to 1864, when Mariah J. Moss published a poetical cookbook to raise funds for Union soldiers who were wounded during the Civil War. The idea caught on quickly, and over 3,000 were published between 1864 and 1922. Most often, those were used by religious groups as a way of raising funds for things like building projects. The interest of the library in such items has a clear relationship to our interest in the history of Delaware. In her bibliography, America's Charitable Cooks, Margaret Cook explains that part of the challenge of studying such books is their elusiveness. These were not large-scale publishing projects. They were not copyrighted. Sold primarily to the friends and family of the contributors, their distribution was extremely small. They were also not generally collected by libraries at the time of publishing, so the collections that institutions possess are made up of what is survived in people's personal collections and donated or found at flea markets and garage sales. Cook says that in addition to putting together her bibliography, more than 3/4 of the items listed are the single publicly documented copy of that volume. On the screen is Brandywine's favorite recipes, compiled by the Women's Society at Christian Service of the Brandywine Methodist Church in Wilmington, Delaware, 1954, and it has clearly seen some usage. One of the other collecting challenges is that these books actually got used. When thinking about the book as an object, this is certainly something to keep in mind. It may seem strange to call it a problem, but a library will generally try to collect the ones that are in the best physical shape and make sure that they stay this way. However, when you think about cookbooks you actually have used in the past, the ones that you prefer tend to be the most beat up and food covered, with annotations about the recipes, and probably even more recipes or notes stuffed into it. When thinking of the book as an object, you can sometimes get a slightly better sense of use from the community cookbooks. This recipe for red velvet cake from the 1971 Christ Church at Christiana 100 Christmas Recipes collection has clearly been tried, since there is a bright red smear of, presumably, red velvet cake across the top. This is typical cookbook usage from the same organization's hors d'oeuvres and canapes volume from the previous year. You can see a check mark indicating that it was tried, a verdict of very good, and a note to use 4 squares instead of the prescribed circles, and a piece of annotated junk mail serving as a bookmark. So we've asserted that a cookbook can be an object for analysis, but it is also an interpretable text. In Ann L. Bauer's Recipes for Reading, Community Cookbooks, Stories, and Histories, she and the other authors make a serious study of the relationship between ethnic identity and cookbooks, particularly of the community or charity variety. This could easily be a topic in and of itself, so I'm merely going to taunt you with a few examples from our own collection and encourage you to explore further. Bauer posits that the charity or community cookbooks generally have 4 different possible plots: integration, differentiation, moral or religious triumph, or historical. Integration and differentiation tend to meet in cookbooks highlighting a particular ethnic group or cuisine. A group may want to authentically present its cuisine and traditions, but this is not done at the expense of their assimilation into the larger, or in this context, largely middle class, community. I think this example works reasonably well as an illustration of the phenomenon. On the previous slide, we saw the cover of a recipe book for the Irish Culture Club. There are definitely Irish recipes contained therein. However, other than perhaps the names of the participants and maybe the steak and kidney pie, there isn't much Irish on this page. Chicken cacciatore is actually Italian in origin, but the Wiener goulash is an interesting case. First, you have a Hungarian word, goulash, but even it's lacking one of the more typically things that make a goulash goulash, namely paprika and seasoned beef. Instead, we have hot dogs and Italian seasoning. And very few things are more intrinsically ingrained in middle-class American culture than doing culinarily questionable things to hot dogs. This little handmade pamphlet also tells an interesting story about differentiation versus integration. The inscription on the next page reads, "We hope that you will use our recipes and will like our cookies from Greece, Germany, Russia, and Poland as much as we like cookies from America. Signed, pupils of the English classes of the Adult Education Department, Wilmington Public Schools." Presumably made as part of an assignment by immigrants actively trying to learn English and assimilate, they are sharing something from outside while explicitly saying how much they want to become insiders. Scholarship and concentrated efforts at collecting charity or community cookbooks often focus on the pre-World War II period. While clearly inspired by trends in national cookbook publishing, they tend to be a bit more free-form in structure and content. 1951's A Cookbook of Favorite Recipes from the Wilmington New Century Club is a little later, but was self-published by the club, so maintains this aesthetic. Under each recipe is the contributor's signature. There is also a mix of typewritten and handwritten contributions, and nearly every recipe is accompanied by some sort of illustration. On the bottom right, one of the date surprise cookies is shouting boo at the other cookie, and an apparently successful attempt to surprise it. This same book also has an extremely literal illustration for Seafood Rabbit, a variation on Welsh rarebit, with the very rare animal swimming in its tank. With the obvious popularity of the cookbook fundraiser, companies formed to streamline the publishing process. An organization merely had to select various templates, solicit replies, and then turn the design process over to one of several competing firms. While the templates and editing oversight do make for a more regularized production and look, the content can still provide an interesting level of variation. Although it uses the same exact template from the North American Press Company as several other books in the collection, the Hadassah 400 from the 1970s has some very unique content. Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, promotes Jewish ties to Israel through education, advocacy, and social reform. The Wilmington chapter's fundraising cookbook, unsurprisingly, includes many traditionally Jewish foods and even reworks one of the sections into an area for Passover holiday dishes. The somewhat out-of-place recipe for a growing boy on the opposite side is a remnant of this template tinkering. Ultimately, it became possible to work with a company that provided Jewish-specific templates for charity cookbook usage. Temple Beth Emeth's Delicious Dishes from the 1940s include some pre-formatted content on Jewish holidays, culture, etc. In this fairly recent book, you can see a bit of pre-made content and advertising for the publishing service. Inclusions range from standard measurements to suggested cooking times to diagrams for cutting meats to glossaries. But even in this least variable section, you can observe some historical trends. Several of the books created before the 1980s include a men-only section toward the back, where recipes contributed by men are segregated. Certainly the makeup of the sponsoring organization has much to do with the presence, or lack, of men in the book. As women were traditionally the cooks, charity cookbooks were most often undertaken by women's clubs or female organizations within larger co-ed bodies, like churches. Another group which suddenly pops into view in later books is children. While the odd recipe might include a comment that it is so easy a child might be able to assist, I did not recall seeing any specific Cooking with Kids sections until the 2012 Love Your Library Cookbook, which encourages having your child help prepare meals and snacks can be fun. It also gets them to try new foods. They can also learn about the foods they are eating. The recipes tend toward healthfulness, which is a development in and of itself. Some of the earliest books had healthful recipes in that they provided suggestions for feeding invalids, but one gets the sense that organizations were generally more interested in producing a book with appealing recipes that people would be willing to purchase, rather than presenting a specific food agenda. There are certainly exceptions, like 1988's Newark Community Cookbook, put together by the Newark Cooperative Food Market, with healthful natural food consumption as a stated goal. I don't want to mislead you, because children do have some sort of representation in cookbooks, particularly those that support organizations based out of schools, like the PTA. However, this doesn't necessarily mean healthful family-friendly recipes. It usually means illustrations. By far, my favorite is Middletown, Delaware's Broadmeadow School's offering from the 1970s, The Flying Gourmet. On this particular page, students from grades 3 and 4 have illustrated how to mix drinks with Sally's Delight, made up of apricot brandy and gin, on the right. Even heavily template-reliant books occasionally incorporate original illustrations. This book uses the community template, but is actually a single author work with the author's children providing additional illustrations. While the historical progression of cookbooks that we've looked at is certainly of value, Margaret Cook observes that these locally produced books are more reflective of trends in foodstuffs and technological change in that specific community than the popular nationally focused works might be. Up on the screen is Tested Lewis Recipes, compiled by the Ladies of the Presbyterian Church, 1916. Listed are different types of bread, some of Dutch, French, or German origin, and even a Delaware biscuit. One of the best represented changes in kitchen technology is the rise of the microwave. Although invented in the 1940s and first commercially available in the 1960s, the microwave often first made large inroads into the American kitchen in the 1980s. Today it is ubiquitous, but largely used for heating up leftovers or cooking prepackaged meals. Particularly when it was new, companies had a stake in convincing potential buyers that it could be used for much more elaborate food preparation, and the recipes reflect this tendency. Several of the charity cookbooks have specific areas set aside for microwave recipes. This 1969 cookbook includes a special microwave section with instructions for ratatouille, sweet potato casserole, caramel corn, and seafood stuffed potatoes. The microwave may be the change that we're most familiar with, but it was far from the first or last technological enhancement that the cook had to contemplate. Cookbooks quietly show the rise of refrigeration, electric mixers, food processors, and more. Christ Church of Christiana 100 produced yet another subject-specific cookbook called Frozen Assets, or How to Freeze Almost Everything, encouraging people to use their freezers in a proactive way, buying things when they were on sale or seasonally available, and making large quantities to store for future consumption. In addition to recipes, there are specific instructions on how to properly package and store different kinds of food. The standard cookbook templates can inadvertently capture random historical moments. This 1980s copy of Favorite Recipes of the Ladies of the Newark Elks reprints the new First Aid for Choking poster. First presented in 1974, the so-called Heimlich maneuver was supported by Surgeon General C. Everett Koop in the 1980s, and many states had or still have laws requiring the posters detailing the process to be displayed in restaurants. Looking away from the food for a moment, we can also see how the books might be of interest to a local historian or genealogist. In most cases, the creating organization will provide a short history to begin the work. An early example of this is the Trinity Parish Cookbook from 1892, produced by the Ladies Parish Aid Society. Also including photographs of the church and the current reverend, it provides a fairly extensive record of the church's history, directory of church leadership, and list of all the individuals who are members of the organization. The Brandywine Cookbook supporting the Parent-Teacher Association of the Mount Pleasant School, Wilmington, from 1935, is the most specific about its contributing authors. It even lists their home addresses. As you can see here, and will see in these books, sometimes as late as the 1980s, they follow formal polite naming conventions, with a woman listed under her husband's name, such as Mrs. Melvin C. Baldwin. In some cases, like Mrs. Anna M. Collins, the woman is listed under her own name. We can't know for certain why one chose which format, but widowhood is a common answer. In any case, it can make tracking names down that much harder for the researcher. Also of interest beyond food are the advertisements often found in the books. While not always present, the books were generally sponsored up front by local businesses in exchange for recognition. Some connections are obvious, like markets or appliance stores, but others are looking to be generally supportive of community betterment and find value in associating their businesses with such efforts. This book, from likely the first half of the 20th century, shows the variety of advertisers, with businesses offering ice cream, window shades, furniture, and steam fitting services. It's less common, but occasionally national firms with relevant products, such as Baker's Chocolate, will appear, like in this Delaware book from 1911. This ad for the Newark department store featuring GE appliances immediately struck me. They're back again and finer than ever. Coming! These GE home appliances! Look for GE home appliances first! If you guessed that this cookbook from the Women's Auxiliary of the First Presbyterian Church dates from 1945, you would be correct. World War II had ended, but between rationing and the shift in America's industrial production, it had been many years since new appliances were even available. Now that they were imminent, the manufacturer and the reseller both wanted you to know that they would be for sale and where to buy them. We do have a random smattering of charity and community cookbooks from other places as well. I chose all of my examples from Delaware, but there was one I just thought was too interesting to omit. The Operation Vittles cookbook was compiled by the American women living in blockaded Berlin in January 1949. When the Soviet Union cut off all land and water access to West Berlin, the Western Allies responded by organizing an airlift of food, fuel, and other necessities. In May of 1949, two separate German states were created, with a divided Berlin. This book features photographs of the airlift, children's drawings, and recipes accompanied by anecdotes about the challenges of being an American living under such circumstances. For example, this recipe for corn pudding adds the following. The necessity-born German trick of cooking foods under the bed covers was quickly adopted by us Berlin Americans when the blockade cut our electricity down to a few short hours daily. Most common dish to be bedded down for the finishing process was rice, but we tried it with great success on roasts and favorite casseroles. Rather than serving as accidental time capsules, these books can also be self-consciously historical. There are cookbooks that celebrate Delaware's 200th anniversary of the ratification of the Constitution, the state's first ladies, and other specific anniversaries. Even the prolific Christchurch Christiana 100, whose books I've already highlighted several times, produced a retrospective work in 2007 with selections and reminiscences about their several decades of previous offerings. One of the most richly described series of books is Nancy Zippy's House Specials series, based on her longtime column in the Wilmington News Journal. She shares stories about both the foods and the reception they received after appearing in the paper. This little addition to Grandmom's Raisin Bread reads, "This no-knead yeast loaf was originated and written in Polish by her great-grandmother, Mary Laskowski, almost 100 years ago, where she lived out in the boondocks, near Cornicatch, Delaware, or in Newark, with 7 children and no store." Zippy also attempts to formulate, with the help of readers, beloved recipes from restaurants that have closed, or share requested recipes provided by restaurants. A sizable number of the community cookbooks feature recipes offered by restaurants. While certainly meant to function as a form of advertisement, they still provide insight into local businesses and tastes. Traditions and cuisine can often be closely linked in Delaware. In recent years, the Pumpkin Chunkin event, where participants attempt to fling pumpkins as far as possible, has gained nationwide attention. A cookbook commemorates the history of the event and features award-winning pumpkin recipes for the related cooking contest. An event which also has culinary relevance for Delaware is Coast Day, which has its own cookbook featuring the winning recipes from the Crab Cook-Off. Seafood is celebrated regularly in the recipes from the state. Local author Robert H. Robertson produced several shellfish-related works. In Left to Your Own Devices, What Implements to Use for Opening Shellfish and How to Use Them, he shows off his own invention, the clam digger's dagger, but laments its lack of success. Another important Delaware industry is chicken farming. We have several publications which tie to the poultry industry. Often they make mention of or provide recipes from the Delmarva Chicken Festival. The University of Delaware, the U.S. and Delaware Departments of Agriculture, and other interested parties often collaborate on publications, such as this one on apple time in Delaware, to promote local products with education and recipes. Broadening our scope beyond Delaware once again, the library has a rather substantial collection of trade catalogs and related items. These include promotional or advertising materials for various food products. This advertising display for Nicholson's Peerless Pure Food colors is particularly visually appealing. With both samples of the product and a full-color guide to the 30 available shades, the company boasts that they are endorsed, used, and recommended by the most prominent cooking schools and dietitians in the country. This also crosses over with our interest in chemistry and dyes, even if the dyes are, in this case, edible. Often free or obtained by sending in proof of purchase from product packaging, companies offered cookbooks to encourage increased use of their products. It's hard not to applaud the creativity of Mueller's Egg Noodles in their efforts to convince the recipient of their advertising cookbook that egg noodles and prunes is an appetizing breakfast option. Food-related premiums need not necessarily offer anything as practical as recipes to entice a customer. This 1895 booklet for T.E. Doherty's New England mincemeat is simply a fanciful, brightly colored keepsake declaring that children who eat mince pie made from this product will grow into splendid American citizens. The patent medicine Hood sarsaparilla makes even more dubious claims in its promotional cookbook. Although the recipes don't have anything in particular to do with the supposed medication, each recipe ends subliminal message-like with a claim like, "Hood sarsaparilla builds up the system," or "Buy Hood sarsaparilla now." Anecdotes about the wonders of the tonic appear between the recipes. While sarsaparilla had no actual curative properties, it became a popular beverage. Not unlike root beer, it is still produced by some American microbrewers. Whether it takes the form of time-tested classics or ephemera of dubious practical use, the cookbook tradition has inspired book artists to respond with their own creations. Having spent so much time looking at creative Jell-O recipes while searching through the community cookbooks, I was particularly taken with Margot Coates and Ian Beck's collaboration, Edible Architecture, which juxtaposes real recipes from molded jellies with fanciful illustrations where they tower over the people in the landscape. Another interesting item is Catherine Meynell's elaborate Eat Book, which incorporates fine printing and textiles. The prospectus describes it as a sardonic poem about food, love, and nursery rhymes, with 6 duotones of the poet's photographs of cherries, sausages, and white bread. Thanks everybody for listening to this talk. It's an interesting time in food history, as I'm sure you can tell. People are navigating shortages and often trying to cook, sometimes for the first time ever. Professionals and amateurs alike are trying to navigate this new circumstance that we're in, and I wish you the best of luck in all that you do. Thank you very much.